Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the reverse score of GT8. We are going to do it a special seminar for some basic, specific aspects of SOPs, approaches, normally what we already done in the type rating about Airbus philosophy. I'm going to do it a little bit, introduce myself. My name is Francisco González. I am training manager here in GT8 Indonesia, working for GT8 for many years. And I'm now here are the responsible of all of these courses here in Indonesia. So in the first, we have to be sure that everybody more or less are already here connected. And we are going to do it, as I tell you, a little bit first to update your knowledge for the people who have already done the type rating with us, of course, and for the rest of the people that already also try to refresh their knowledge. Remember that this one is is basic aspect of the normal procedures, normal Airbus philosophy, normal operation, and all kind of approaches, okay, to update that knowledge. To be sure that everything goes smoothly, we are going right now, everybody see me, I'm going to shut down the camera and we are going to go directly into the presentation. So as I said before, welcome on board to this online seminar of GT8. First of all, I'm going to try to stop the camera, but I don't need that momentum. Okay, so we are going to do it like this. So remember that today we are going to do the reverse course for standard procedure, task sharing, approaches, and ECAM handling and philosophy of the Airbus 320. Most of you are doing the type rating with us, with GT8, but some of them are it's already done with another school, so could be some little different aspects about this one. So as I told you, it's a basic course, and first we are going to be deeply a little bit or try to update the knowledge of the normal procedures. About the normal procedures, as we can see here, is the habits and routines that we already acquire, we already obtained during training or during my type rating. Okay, so but the thing is, if we all of this knowledge, we already follow exactly as we did. Okay, this kind of disciplines, okay, it will be redundancy. It will be at the end good for the safety aspects. So a strict adherence to the standard operational procedures, the SOPs, and associated normal checklists, because are like this, is a major contribution to the preventing and reducing incident and accidents. So what we are going to talk. First, objective of this one, then a summary of the documents, and then all about SOPs of all different phases of the flight. Then we are going to talk about approaches, different kind of approaches, how to do it, how to perform, how to manage these approaches. We are going also to talk about call-outs. We are going to talk a little bit also about visual pattern, circling, and go around. And of course, we are going to talk about the flight management, how to engage and disengage the autothrust, autopilots, call-outs, golden rules, and something essential like abnormal operation management and ECAM philosophy. So at the end, what we should get, what we should have this kind of things is to understand how to apply the normal SOPs. Be familiar with the abnormal and emergency procedure, be familiar with Airbus Gondel rules, familiar with the aircraft automation and the standard callouts. Now we are going to start with, as with the index 8, we are going to talk about documentation. The first time that you arrive in the school, the first day, normally we give you a huge amount of documents, many pages. When you see these kind of pages at the beginning, you will see that you are able to read all of this information. We are able to manage all of these things. Yes, because we are telling you exactly how to do it step by step. But we can reduce in the three main books or three main manuals. First, the FCON. What is the FCON? The FCON is the key element, is the main book for these things. When we have any doubt, when you already finished your type rating. So right now, when you have any doubt, when you request more information, if you want to go deeply on something, you have to go where? To the main book, the FCON. But the FCON that is divided on chapters, this FCON sometimes is a little bit dark because it's very specific of everything. If we have to know something about the systems, we have to go to the FCON. If we want to go to know how one of the systems works, we have to go to the FCON. Also, if we need to know what is about the normal procedures, we go to the FCON, call-outs, limitation, memory items. What happened with the QRH? The QRH is the quick reference handbook that we have already in the aircraft. Remember that the QRH is something that is specific for every aircraft. We cannot take one QRH and go to different aircraft with the same QRH. It's specific for every aircraft. And what happened with the QRH? In the QRH, there are also normal procedures. Also, there are abnormal procedures. So it's divided also in different chapters. The third book is the Flight Crew Techniques Manual. The Flight Crew Techniques Manual, okay, also is divided in different chapters, and there are three main important things. The first one of the chapter is the Airbus philosophy. Because the Flight Crew Techniques Manual, instead of the FCON that I told you that is a little bit difficult to understand sometimes, the FCON is like a novel. You can read it. You can read it before go to sleep. You can go and see chapter by chapter and get a good information about how to handle some normal aspect of the flight or abnormal aspect of the flight. What is the Airbus philosophy? What are the different colors in the aircraft? You can find it in the Flight Crew Techniques Manual. So in the FCON, as I tell you before, the FCON is divided in different chapters. One of them are the normal procedures. One of the chapters, that is the one that we are going to study today to refresh a little bit. What is the SOPs? What is the operational procedure? Because we always talk about operational procedure, but what is the meaning of this one? During the daily normal operation of the crew, the daily normal operation of the aircraft, the flight crew perform actions frequently. We do it every day, the same things. These actions that we do is identified as a routine task. It's doing it as a routine. We do it every day, the same things. This kind of routine task is supported, is what we say, the standard operational procedure. So this one, at the end, is something that you do it every day. Every time that you are going to fly, you have to prepare the cockpit. You have to do it, the taxi SOPs, the climb, every day in the same way. And at the end, you have to do it by memory. What are inside the QRH? The QRH is, you see, okay, one of the things that are inside the QRH, you will see in the normal procedures, okay, you see the list of these actions that you have to do it. It's a list. And here, if you see, if you open your checklist that you already get when you did it, the type rating, you see that is divided in two columns, one for the pilot flying and one for the pilot monitoring. This is the action that you have to do it. This is what we say task sharing, task sharing. And all of this task sharing, all of this task that you do it every day in the same way as a routine, and is always organized in a specific way, do it step by step in an harmonized sequence, is what we say, is what we call flows. And here is a good picture how to do it. The flows of the pilot monitoring and the flows of the pilot flying. Because we have to remember that this one is one of the key issues of what? Of the task sharing, the Airbus philosophy. Okay? There are SOPs, there are flows for every procedure that we have to do it. How to prepare the cockpit, how to taxi, how to climb, all of these things. And how when we are going to start, when we have to start these flows, there are one thing that we name, that the name is trigger. Okay, so we initiate these triggers, we initiate these flows with one movement, with one trigger. It's an action to give the information to the other pilot when they have to start the flow. Then it's a good. Then we have to be sure that we understand what is the callouts on the FCON, callouts, because we have to know that inside the cockpit we use a specific language. Maybe you already don't. Most of you maybe are not flying, but when you fly in the cockpit, maybe you are going to fly with someone with different mother language. You can request the things. You have to talk with him with a specific way of doing it. This one is the call outs. These call outs are to request for a checklist, to do something of the MCDU on FCU and MCDU. How to request flaps. You cannot say, give me flaps, or put one step. Not. There is one way to do it. There is one way to request. So any doubt about the other pilot, what and when have to do it. When also there are call-outs for what? To inform about the deviation of the flight. If you are not following the localizer, if you are not following your speed, there is one way to explain to people that you are missing this one. You cannot say a little bit more to the right, a little bit more to the left, only city kit, only not. You have to do it. You have to say in a specific way. This is what we say callouts. Where are the callouts? Here. Remember the FCON? FCON, procedures, normal procedure, a standard operation, and a standard callouts. Another key things, important thing, is we have to refresh our limitation. Why we have to know the limitation? Limitation is one key aspect that give the idea that you are a good professional. But we have to be sure that these limitations, there are many limitations. Of course, that is difficult to know by memory all of these things. But there are someone that is very important to know which one are. For instance, we have to know what is the altitude that we can extend the flaps or slats. When we can use the pneumatic for the APU. What are the imbalance that we can support? What are the fuel quantities? What is my limitation for the landing gear? Can we fly with the landing gear extend at 320 knots? These limitations are necessary to know if you want to be a professional pilot of Airbus 320. Other aspects that we have to be sure that we keep in your knowledge is the memory items. Also remember that is on the FCON procedures. In that case is abnormal, and this one is on memory. In this aircraft, as Airbus say, please, is not necessary to learn everything by memory. But there are some of them, there are some procedures that is compulsory to learn by memory. This one is the memory items. Okay, so because imagine that we are taking off and we have wind shear. You cannot request of the pilot, if you are pilot flying, you cannot request the pilot monitoring. What we should do when we have wind shear? Or can we retract the landing gear when we have wind shear? Can we remove the flaps? No, we have to know exactly how to do it by memory. If we hear in the cockpit, terrain, we have to be sure that we have to know how to act when we hear this one. Or pull up. You cannot in that momentum request the pilot monitoring. In your opinion, what we should do? Not. We have to react immediately and doing the task immediately that is compulsory to know. And also how to call these memory items. We have a TICAS, and in the TICAS also we have to do it immediately because we are trying to avoid another traffic that is coming in front of us. So all of these things is something that you have to prepare in advance. You have to do it. You have to keep in your mind all of these things on refresh all of these memory items and the way to call these memory items. That the third book, Fly Crew Techniques Manual. This is the other book that we already talked about this one. The Fly Crew Techniques Manual, as I say, is like a novel. Inside, you will see not in a dark way. He will explain clearly how to do it, some special maneuver that is important to know. Give you good information about the philosophy of the Airbus. Why the color of the things? How the aspect to do it when you found one ECAM, how to react of these things, how to follow the ECAM actions, why you have to read and do. Why you read, why you have to know the memory items. So at the end is the fly technique, how to do it, difference abnormal and normal operation. In the flight crew techniques manual, you will see how to do it, explain deeply how to do it an emergencies and already detected. What happened with the cures that we already talked? The cure is the quick reference handbook. On the cure reference handbook, there is inside abnormal and not ECAM procedure inside. Also, there are one expanded normal list of the normal procedures. Another important issue is the landing performance calculations. Landing performance, in-flight performance. This is the thing that you have to know how to handle these things when you have one problem in the aircraft and you have to land in a specific airport. Maybe this problem is not going to let you land in this one because your landing distance will be increased so much and you don't have enough runway. Also, there are inside the operational engineering bulletins that is compulsory, because remember that the curage, every curage is for every aircraft, and you have to know what are the OEBs that is affected to this aircraft. Okay, now we are going to, we have already talked about the documents, we already talked about the books, and now we are going to be properly with different aspects of the procedures. First one is safety steering inspection, something that we have to do it, the pilot monitoring, and then the primary copy preparation. Okay, this is, as we see, how the cure rate is. Did you see that is divided in columns? Only to remember, this one is for pilot flying, and this one is the pilot monitoring. This is the line that divides these things. This is the tax sharing that we cannot do it different things that is already here. But this one is a list of tasks that is inside the cure rate, but only tell you what to do, but not what you should know about when you press battery, when you act of one of these buttons. If you read it, you will see here battery. You have to check an auto. Where you have to know, where you have the information, where do you have the information to get that information to obtain the things that you have to do it when you check the battery. For instance, the battery. You have to go to the main book, to the FCON. Is where we see, because here, if you see, there is only a list of the things. And this is how the pilot monitoring has to prepare the cockpit. Okay, when you enter in the cockpit that is dark, you have to prepare the cockpit when you are going to energize the aircraft, and to avoid that something is in the wrong position. Because if the flight lever is not on zero and you energize the aircraft and you energize some hydraulic, the flaps is going to move, and some people underneath, some people who is working outside can damage. So this is the thing. Also the radar. Imagine that the radar is not in the proper position. When you energize the aircraft, what happened? That there will be so many radiation to the people in front. So we have to be sure that everything is in the proper position. Afterwards, when the pilot monitoring already did the cockpit preparation, primary cockpit preparation, he has to do it, the emergency equipment items. This is a list of the things that he has to do it. And this is how to don't forget anything. And after that, when the pilot monitoring already do his primary cockpit preparation, is when the pilot monitoring can go to do it the walk around. And in that momentum, the pilot flying will be alone in the cockpit. Is the momentum for do it his task. Is the momentum to do it his actions. Did you see? In that case, the pilot monitoring is doing the walk around and the pilot flying is doing all of these things. Remember that all of these things that has to do with the pilot flying that he say here, okay, to know exactly when we press one of the buttons, what is going to happen or what are the things that we have to be expected. We have to do it to the FCON specifically to the normal operation. And if you already see on the QRA, there is a list of the task and how we have to do it. One of the things, okay, that we have to do it is the flows. So at the end, all of these tasks that is already done in a proper way, okay, we have to do it one flow as like this. It's a way to do it. And we have to avoid of the white lights. We have to remove all the white lights. This one about the white lights is the things that you have to see on the Airbus philosophy. What is the reason that you have to remove the white lights? Also, how to do it, the cockpit voice recorder. How to do it well, the cockpit voice recorder check. This way of presentation that is on the FCON is the flows. How the proper way to do it to avoid that something is going to be forget. We don't want that anything is going to be forget. And this is the way to do it properly in a very easy way. That is the way of do it in different, the upper head panel, the center panel, and the pedestrian. And later on, we have to fulfill the MCDU. We have to fulfill the MCDU. How do we are going to fulfill the MCDU? How to introduce all the data which is necessary? Because remember that the MCDU is the key aspect to everything. As much as you can do on ground, less work loaded we will have during the flight. And this is the acronyms to enter the things on the MCDU. First, go to data, then INI, so it's DFRAP. We are going to be a little bit quickly about this one, okay? Then the first thing is to know on the this one, okay, is that data. Data you have to check, okay? The status, you have to check the base and the performance factor. Then we have to go to init. This is the thing, this is the initial page you have to fulfill while is the only thing that you can fulfill while the pilot monitoring is in the cockpit. Why we have to introduce? Maybe we have to introduce the from, the departure and the destination, so the IR is able to start the align. Then we have to do it. The flight plan, introduce the flight plan, then all of the aspect of the flight plans, and afterwards we have to fulfill, we have to prepare the secondary flight plan. Why we have to prepare a secondary flight plan? The secondary flight plan is one backup. It's something that maybe you will need it if something is necessary. If you have some failure and you have to return quickly to the destination, to your departure airport, if you have to return quickly because you have one passenger, there is we have to return to because you have some problem with some passenger, because you have some problem with the aircraft, we have some fire, whatever, you have to return immediately. If you already prepare the flight plan to return, it will be much more easy and less workload. Then we have to introduce the radio navs. Why we have to introduce the radio nav? Remember that on the MCDU, this aircraft has auto-tune. The auto-tune, okay, use the radio aids that in that momentum the aircraft necessary. He has this one. He do it by his own. But maybe the preference of the aircraft will not the same that you want. This is the thing that maybe you have to introduce the viewer or the aid that you needed to be sure on the ND is what you really want. Then you have to introduce data for the init B, okay, your zero field weight, the center of gravity, everything. And then the performance on the primary flight plan. You have to introduce the different aspects of the speeds, flaps, and all of this. This one is one of the most important page of the MCDU, the performance primary flight plan, because we have to already calculate your speeds, the position of the flaps, the trim, the flex temperature for the thrust, and also when you are going to reduce the thrust and when you are going to pass to the climb, and also the engine out acceleration. We are going to later on this one. Remember that these things that is already. We are going to later on this one. Remember that these things that is already the pilot is the pilot flying who has to do it. He is going to do it, or he will do it during the period of time that the pilot monitoring is on the walk around. Okay, so later on, the pilot monitoring go into the cockpit again, and is the momentum to continue with some scan flows to finalize how to prepare the cockpit for the flight. Okay, and in that momentum is when we have to check the oxygen mask. You have to check the oxygen mask. But it's very important that before check the oxygen mask, we have to call the ground personnel, the ground staff, to be sure that he removed the headset, or they remove the headset to avoid any damage to them. Later on, when this one is already done, so we already almost do the cockpit preparation. The cockpit is already prepared for takeoff. It's already prepared for start the flight. What do we have to do in that momentum? The pilot flying has to do it the takeoff briefing. Takeoff briefing. This one is something that we have to follow what the SOPs of your company, of course, because every company has maybe his own way to do it, the takeoff briefing. But there are on the flight crew techniques manual, there is a very good explanation how to do it. the takeoff briefing. And these things, it will, because remember that who fulfill the MCDU, who knows how is going on the flight, is the pilot flying. Is the one who, during the walk around of the pilot monitoring, already introduced all the data. Okay? But, introduce all the data. But the pilot monitoring, he doesn't know what the intention of the pilot flying. This is the reason of the briefing. What we are going to do when takeoff, what we are going to do it, how we are going to taxi into the holding point. What are the conditions that we request anti-ice or not? And what happens if we have an emergency? So there are two aspects into the takeoff briefing. The normal one and the abnormal. These things are the things that you have to briefing. These things is necessary. And the way to do it is, I tell you, on the flight crew techniques manual is doing quite well. But you have to follow always the SOPs of your companies. So here, as we see, there is one way to do it, the takeoff briefing on the flight crew techniques manual. Okay, so aircraft operational issues, what are the NOTAM that is affected? We need to use the radar, we will use the anti-ice, we have enough fuel. What is the fuel that we are going to use? What is the SID that we are going to use? What is my minimum sector altitude in the area if we have to return? So this is key aspect that you have to be sure that the pilot monitoring get it. Okay, we already, the cockpit right now in this momentum is fully ready to start my flight. But now we have to start the engines, because without start the engines, it's not possible to move. So remember that all of these things that we see on because this one, we are still with the QRH. All of these tasks are inside the QRH. So we have to do it by memory. We cannot take the QRH for every phase of the flights and try to remember what we have to do it. So when we reach in that momentum is when the pilot, the pilot monitoring has to read the first checklist. We have already talked about SOPs, flows, the way of do it, trigger, what is the momentum to start one scan flow. But until now, we don't say, I haven't said anything about checklist. We already see in the slide before that we have to know the things, we have to do the things by memory. But maybe we can forget something. We forgot something. Okay, we have the net of the checklist. Checklist is the net to avoid that anything that we already done, is properly in the position that we want. So after every scan flows, there is one checklist to tell me if everything is correct or not. Who requests the checklist? The pilot flying. The pilot flying has to request to the pilot monitoring the checklist in the proper momentum. And I say after every scan flows. Maybe someone of you say, it's not true, of course. We will see later on. There is only two momentums that we are going to do, a scan flow, and we don't have any checklist. How to read the checklist? We have to remember. In that case, here in the before start checklist, the pilot monitoring has to start reading. When the pilot flying say before start checklist, he start reading until this line. When already the pilot flying answer properly how the button is when the pilot monitoring say before start checklist down to the line. And you see here, when here we see both, is because both has to answer properly about this one. Okay? So before start checklist, down to the line. And afterwards is when we have to request, because we already, with this one, with before start checklist down to the line, we already know that my cockpit, my aircraft is perfect, prepared for a start and start movement. Perfect. All the switches, all the buttons are in the proper position. Okay? So when we already do it, is the momentum that we can start request for a start to request to the ATC that we want to start the engines. We have to request pushback clearance and start the engines. If we see here in this flow, this is a very good picture how do the task sharing is. The pilot flying, okay, when takeoff briefing is completed, the pilot flying is request before a start checklist. The pilot monitoring read it down to the line. Then is when the pilot flying requests, okay, the startup clearance, and is when the pilot flying requests what? Below the line. Remember that we have down to the line and below the line. After when we already have this clearance is when we have to read below the line. Okay, so we have to, the pilot flying request before start checklist, then down to the line, and then the pilot monitoring request start up and push back. But we have to be sure that before move the aircraft during the pushback, before do it, the before start checklist has to be completed, because only remember, we go back again, remember that when only in that momentum when we finish with this point is when the pilot monitoring can say before a start checklist complete, not when we reach down to the line. No, when you start this one is before the start checklist completed. So this checklist we have to already finalize before start the engines. Then we have to talk with ground staff to confirm the area is clear, and we have to move to put this one on ignition to try to start the engines. Okay, now we are going to start the engine. We already, this one is already done. The before start checklist is already complete, and we are going to start the engines. Okay, remember that these things we have to do it by memory. We cannot before start the engine start reading the QRH, what are the actions that we have to do it. This one, if you see, engine mode selector, ignition, engine start, we have to announce, we have to say engine 2 is going to start. okay? But this one is something that you have to do it by memory. When we move the ignition, okay, we have to check, is one of the most important things. When we move this one to ignition start, is when we have to confirm that no amber crosses appears where in the upper screen. On the ECAM, remember that we have two unit displayed. The upper one, that engine and warning display, in that screen is where we can find all the principal elements of the engine. When we try to start the engines, could not be amber crosses, and it's the momentum to take time. And when this one first, and then engine master. What are the good things that we have today on the aircraft, on this A320, and almost right now in the modern aircraft? We have one computer inside of the engine. This computer, the name is FADEC. This computer is going to looking what happened inside the engine. All aspects that are going, if everything is going well or there is some malfunctions. This is the how we can see when we already moved this one to ignition, is how we have to see, cannot be any cross here. And did you see, this one is the thing that we have to see that is going on properly. This is a good idea. This is a good way to understand how the engine starts, is to know the action that the engine, the FADEC, is going to do. We have to open the start valve, the pneumatic is going to go into, the N2 is moving, and then we have to reach N2, then when ignition is going on, then when the full flow is going to start, and when we have ignition and full flow, the EGT is going to increase. All of these things we have to know. Of course, the FADEC, FADEC is the one who is looking for, is waiting to see some malfunctions. But properly, we have to follow how it's going on, to be in advance, to know if something, maybe there are some malfunctions. And afterwards, when everything here on the engine start is working, okay, is when we can start with the engine number 2. What are the normal parameters? And one more or less, and one could be between 20, EGT more or less is 400, and to about 60. This is as we have to know that everything is going well in the engine. As we see here, 246, 220, 460, 246. 246 is a memo technique to know that the engines are correct. Okay, we have already started with the 2 engines. We already started the 2 engines. Okay, so when we already start the 2 engines, what we have to do it? Remember that always after this we have to do it 1 scan flows. On the scan flow, this one is when we can see the proper way of do it with the trigger. Because if we see here the scan flow, the pilot flying actions, the first thing is ignition off. The hand of the pilot flying from here go up to the upper side. And in that momentum, when the pilot flying move the ignition, when the pilot flying select ignition to normal is the trigger to the pilot monitoring start his flows. Because Airbus doesn't want that the pilot flying is touching this area and at the same time cross hands with the other pilots doing different things here. This is forbidden as a Airbus philosophy. This is the reason that when the pilot flying from here go up is when the pilot monitoring has his own flow. And after that, the scan flows, normally you have to, to be sure to the ground, personal ground staff, remove everything and show you the safety pins normally. And after that is when you have to the pilot flying request after a start checklist. Okay, so we have already 2 engines running. We have to be already see that we have to do it, different flows and different checklist for this one. So remember that we have some procedures, we have some flows. These procedures is done by memory. Why? Because it's a standard one. It's something that you do it frequently. It's something that you do it every day. And to avoid that everything is, if you don't forget anything, there is a checklist to confirm these things. Okay, you have the 2 engines running, and this is the momentum that the pilot flying requests taxi clearance. Okay, once we already get that information, is when we have to be sure the area is clear, both sides, and start moving. How the aircraft start moving? We have to increase the power. How much we have to increase the power? Only a little bit. There are very big restrictions about how much power is going to use on ground. We have to put less than 40% of any 40% of N1. Why? Because maybe sometimes there are cars that is passing behind, and with the jet blast, there are people that is walking. Sometimes there are cars. Sometimes, and the energy of the engines is too high if we put more than this one. After this, when the aircraft start moving, in that momentum is when the pilot flying has to request what? Brakes check. You have to check the brakes. But at the beginning of the movement, you cannot wait later on. You have to do it in that momentum. You have to be sure that before going in the middle of the taxi, you have some problem with the brakes. So you are going to check the brakes in that momentum. You have to, the pilot monitoring has to announce brake check, has to press softly on the brakes, and the pilot monitoring has to check on this specific instrument of the yellow system that everything goes well. That is not information that we are, because remember that with the 2 engines, we are braking with the normal system. The normal system of the brakes are with the green system. But the instrument that we have on the cockpit about the brakes is the information about the yellow system. So if the yellow system is giving me information that we are using this yellow hydraulic system, it means that we are not using the normal brake. We are using the alternate brake. So something is going wrong. So also during the taxi, remember that we have also scan flows. And there are things that we have to do. The pilot flying is using the tiller and is moving during the taxi. And remember that when we are out of the platform, when we are clear of obstacle, is when we have to do it another check, another check that we're going to be in the next slides. What about the tiller? And how to follow, because the aircraft has to follow the yellow line when taxi. We have to follow this yellow line, that is the information that the proper way of flying, of taxi. This is how the yellow line has to see for the pilot on the right-hand side and the pilot on the left-hand side. This is the proper position. And how is the tiller is moving. So we have to use the tiller properly. We have to use the tiller very smooth at the beginning, because the tiller commands is not linear, is increasing as we move, as we increase. We have to do it really very careful. Once we are out and we are clear of the obstacles, is when the pilot flying has to request flight controls. Please, the flight controls, and you have to do it in the proper way, because the pilot flying has to put the side stick up a little bit time, then full down a little bit time, and then let on neutral. And the pilot monitoring has to follow on the SD page, on the lower page of the ECAM. Okay, on this one we have to follow the information that is arise in that page. Then later on, left, full right, and with the, of course, with rudder. Okay. Later, the pilot monitoring has to do the same thing, but on silence. This is the when finished, when already the flight control is already finished, is the another trigger for start the flows of the pilot monitoring. This one here, you see the flows of the pilot monitoring. So when already finished the flight control is when the pilot monitoring has to start his own flows. So we have another trigger. Trigger, remember, that is the action that said to the other pilot when he has to start the flow. And so this one is also during the taxiway. Okay. During the taxiway, before reaching, almost reaching the holding point, is when we have to do it. Almost when we reach the holding point is when we have to read, when the pilot monitoring is going to request what? Before takeoff checklist. But during this one, before this one, is when we have to, the pilot flying also during this time, during the taxi to the holding point, has to do it what we say the takeoff briefing. The takeoff briefing is also something that normally in the SOPs of the company are different cases, different way of doing it. But if we follow exactly what Airbus say that on the takeoff briefing, the briefing that the pilot flying is going to do during the taxi to the holding point, if there is no change, nothing different of the previous takeoff briefing, the pilot flying can say takeoff briefing, no change. Is able as policy of Airbus. But remember that if you cannot take off in the same runway, in the same threshold, or you have to take off in different intersection, or you have different altitude, or you have different SID, you have to do it. A new take off briefing is compulsory to do it like that. So you read the before takeoff checklist, and it is. And you have to say before takeoff checklist down to the line. And you have to see the ECAM memo that everything is on green. Remember that you have to be careful that everything is on green, because if it is not on green, what happened? The aircraft is not properly configured for takeoff, and you want to get some alarm, some advice during the takeoff. So before takeoff, and you have to read it, and I will say before takeoff checklist down to the line, the pilot monitoring. This is done almost reaching or before reaching the holding point. Afterwards, the pilot flying has to request to enter in the runway for takeoff. And before entering the runway, the pilot flying has to do his own flows for takeoff below the line, and the pilot monitoring also his own flows. Packs off, it depends of the company, TCAS rate, the lights of the aircraft. All of these things you have to do it before line up. And you have to advise also the cabin crew that you are going to take off in a short period of time. This thing you have to do it before exactly line up, and before reading also below the line. Why? Because imagine that in that moment that you enter in the runway, you will request for the ATC clear for takeoff immediate takeoff, and you say I cannot in that moment, and it's not possible, and you hear Air France 123, Airbus 476 go around because you lost, because you don't read in the proper momentum the below the line before takeoff checklist below the line. This is the thing that before line up you should already do it. You have to have the aircraft perfectly configured, and everything that did before line up, and everything ready to be fully ready to take off immediately if ATC requests. So the aircraft, as we say, the pilot flying requests below the line before entering the runway, and the pilot monitoring has to do it his own flows. Okay, now we are going to take off. Remember that on the takeoff also we have on the QRH the actions that we have to do it, but we cannot during the takeoff. During the takeoff, we cannot read the aspect, the task that we have to do it. Okay, we cannot do it. We have to do it by memory. And what happened when we enter when we are going to align on the runway? When we are aligned on the runway, we have to be sure that we don't have any red lights before entering. So avoid any red lights. It's very important. And we have to be sure that every calculation, every performance calculation we already did is the proper for the position that we are already take off. Okay, so now we are going fully ready on the holding point, and we have to be sure that we are on that holding point. We have to be sure that we have on that holding point. What happened with, and now we are going now to do it the proper takeoff. The proper takeoff is we have to divide in two aspects. If we have crosswind or not crosswind. If we have crosswind more than 20 or less than 20. If we have less than 20, it means that the technique is the normal one. How is the normal one? Remember that this one, if we see the aspect, this one is the position of the levers. This position of the levers, this one, okay, we have to move until 50, and we have to wait until the green line, okay, and the power is already established on this one, on here, on the 50%. This is the weight with no crosswind. If we have crosswind, okay, we have to do it in two steps, because the proper weight is, first we have to put the thrust on 15, wait until the power is already stabilized, and then we have to continue until the position of decline, and afterward flex or toga. This is the weight of do it. Okay? What happens if we have crosswind? If we have crosswind, okay, we have to move one step between 50 and climb. We have to move until 17 and see how increase the power. Okay, the first when we don't have so much crosswind, we have to move the side stick half the weight, and if we have very more than 20 knots of crosswind, is when we have to put the side stick full forward to be sure that the nose is properly on the ground. Okay, once we already move the thrust until toga or flex, it depends on how we are going to take off. We have to correct the wind. We have to, it doesn't matter if the fuel is less than 20, the aircraft, the tendency is nose to the wind. So we have to move the rudder to maintain the aircraft on the runway. And after that, we have to follow the FMA. The pilot flying, when we already advance the levers to the flex or toga, he has to read the FMA. Please, when you read the FMA, when say MAM, flex, SRS, runway, auto thrust, blue, when you read it, because it's something that you have to do at the beginning, you have to keep also your sign on the runway, because the aircraft, if you have wind, the aircraft is going to move forwards the wind, and maybe you can lose the runway. Later on, when we already get the speed, the proper speed, because you will see B1, first, of course, we have to advise 100 knots of the pilot monitoring has to abide 100 knots. The pilot monitoring, when he said 100 knots, the pilot flying has to check that he has the same speed. And he has to answer, check. Later on, you have to do it what? You have to see, you have to wait for the B1. On B1, the pilot the pilot monitoring. The pilot who is not using the thrust is going to remove the hands. And later on, we have to here rotate. How we are going to rotate? How is going to do it? The pilot flying rotate the aircraft is going to position to 15 degrees nose up. But you have to do it in the proper way. You cannot do it with the rate that you want. You have to do it a different way. So how you have to do it this way? So, because if you do it quickly, what happened? Maybe you will have one tail strike. And if you do it slow, what happened? That the clear obstacles will not be properly also. So you have to do it in a proper way. How you do it the proper way of the position of the nose to the 15? How do you do it? You have to do it this position in 5 seconds. As one of the students told me, oh, Captain, but I don't know how to count 5 seconds. And he told me at the end, okay, it's easy because we can say 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana, 4 banana, 5 banana. During this time is the time that you have to put the nose on 15 degrees. Remember, 15 degrees nose up with 2 engines. With 1 engine is 12.5. So this is more or less how to do it. First, we have to get 100 knots. Then we reach B1, rotate, pitch on 15. Okay, and then later on we have to clear the obstacles, clear the flaps. What about the proper way of do it? We have to remember that when takeoff, one of the things that we have to follow is the first, as I told you, you have to put the nose on 15 degrees nose up. This is the way to do it. 15 degrees nose up. But what happened when afterwards? You follow, then afterward you have to follow the SRS. You have to follow this horizontal bar or the high director. This is a good thing that we have information about the horizontal bar of this one. Is the speed reference. And the SRS, the position that is going to give me later on is to maintain B2 plus 10. We are not going to climb up B2. We are going to climb up B2 plus 10. And when we are able to clean the aircraft, later on, because later, remember that we introduce on the MCQ at the beginning of ground, we introduce when on the PFD is going to flash, and tell me to move the thrust on climb. We already put on the MCDU when is going to advise the PFD. So when we reach this altitude, the flash on the PFD lever climb, and the pilot flying is going to put the levers on climb positions. And afterwards, at the same time, the pilot monitoring, if we already take off without patch, is going to put patch 1 and later after 10 seconds, patch 2. This one we continue with the SRS, maybe maintaining B2 plus 10. But when on the FMA, when the FMA changed to climb and the pitch of the aircraft goes to 10 degrees, my speed is going to increase. And when we pass the specific speed, F speed, S speed, is when the pilot flying has to request flaps 1, flaps 0, according to this one. But remember, there is very important that the pilot monitoring is something that is essential, that always, when we reach these speeds, he has to speed check. He has to say a speed check, and of course, don't say a speed check. He has to say a speed check, and at the same time, he has to look into a speed tape on his instrument, on his primary flight display, to confirm that is able to withdraw, is able to retract the flaps. Once we already retract the flaps, is when the pilot flying can request after takeoff climb checklist, and the pilot monitoring has to read this one until down to the line, and he say after takeoff checklist down to the line. When we cross the transition altitude, and the pilot flying will call set standard, okay, the pilot monitoring will say standard cross check passing that specific altitude. And the pilot flying is when he requests the below the line. So after that, after takeoff climb checklist is completed, he has to do it his own flows, and the flight is continuing normally until we pass what we say the 10,000 above the airport, 10,000 above the airdrome. When we pass 10,000 above the altitude of the airport is when we have to, the pilot has to request 10,000 check. 10,000 check is one thing that has his own flow, but there is no checklist. Remember that I told you, every checklist has its own, every flows has its own checklist. But this one, 10,000 check climbing and 10,000 check descending, don't have checklist. Now it's good to do it a little bit aspect about what happened with flight level 100, about taxiing. It's important that pilot flying has to ask to the pilot monitoring for any MCDU entry when you are below 100. Okay? In the MCDU entry. Why? Because the pilot flying has to be focused on his primary flight display. What happened with when we are on manual flight without autopilot? In that case, also the pilot flying has to request the pilot monitoring any action, not only on the MCDU, also on the FCU. Okay, when we cross the 10,000 check, the pilot flying requests 10,000 check, and we perform his own flow. Remember that in the flow say clear and copied. So we have to remove the radio naps that we already did when we introduce on ground, we put some specific radio naps that right now we don't need it, because remember that when we introduce the radio nap on the MCDU is because we don't want that is auto-tuned. because we want to have some specific information. But right now on 10,000 J is not necessary. We are going to let the aircraft to auto-tune what he wants. This is clear. We are going to remove on the radio nav page this one. What happened with the other thing that is cockpit, clear and cockpit? You remember that on the secondary flight plan, we already make a backup, or we already do it some specific flight plan to return immediately. Is the momentum to do it a really backup copy of the flight plan that we are using in that momentum, and we have to keep it on the secondary if something happens. Because there is an aspect we have to, on this one, on the scan flows, the pilot monitoring can advise the pilot flying how is the optimum flight plan, what is the maximum flight plan that we can use it. Then on cruise, okay, we have to check everything about the aircraft, the systems, and we have to be sure that we have to review all the pages of the system that everything are correct. And what we are going to wait, we are going to wait for to be all ready or at alt cruise. So we have to be sure that the altitude that we are maintaining of cruise is the same that we have in the MCDU. Okay, now we are going to one of the important aspects of the flight, prepare the approach. I don't know if you remember this arrow, this broken arrow. This broken arrow is something that the on the ND screen appears on the flight plan to tell you where the FMNGC is preparing the descent. When for the computer is the proper momentum to descend. So before this point, more or less 80 nautical miles, we have to start preparing the descent. Please, when we prepare the descent, do it properly. We have to get information about the weather information about the destination airport. We have to know what is the runway that is going to use. We have to take the charts for this one. We cannot start introducing the things on the MCDU, okay, without any information at all, with the information that we have when we take off, because maybe the runway use, the weather, everything is already changed. So we have to take information about the 80s, and also we have to be sure that the landing distance are properly, okay, and you have to do it more or less 80 nautical miles before the momentum of descent. We have to be sure that this momentum of descent, that is where the ATC is already prepared, okay, is something that we have to already done. The computer is already done well. And if not, we have one rule, very good one, that is the rule of 3. This one is something that always every pilot have to keep it in his mind, okay? That is, as we see, is the distance, the landing elevation, and if we multiplied per 3 plus the elevation can give me the actual flight plan. These things is something that we normally do it in the type rating more deeply. Okay, how to do it? How to introduce all the things on the MCDU. We are going to introduce the MCDU what we say the hat. like this. Did you see? That is more or less the hat is the way. He's telling me how to put everything on every key of the MCU. The important aspect are minimum altitudes. We have to know where we are. We have to see what is in my chart. This is the reason I said you have to take the chart. What is the minimum sector altitudes? What are the things that at what altitude I can descend? This is important. We have to have the idea where we are. And also when we prepare, one of the most important things is a good briefing of the go around. Because remember that the go around is something that happens immediately. It's happening immediately. And if these things happen in that moment, you cannot thinking of how is the go around. The descent, remember that you have to do this one in the top of descent, and try to do it on manage or descent, and on manage or the speed, because on manage we are going to follow the restrictions, because when we prepare the descent, when we prepare the start, when we prepare the approach, there are restrictions on altitudes. If we don't descend of manage, we are not going to stop in these restrictions. We are not follow the speed restriction or the altitude restriction. It's very important to do it. And of course, remember that below 100, we have to keep it 250 knots in most of the terminal areas. Okay. On this one, we have to be sure. Okay. On the 10,000 check descendants, one of the things that we have to be sure is that our accuracy is not low. Remember that there are some specific approaches that we have to do it with accuracy high. With accuracy low, we cannot do it. Maybe when you are full managed, maybe we cannot do it managed selected. These kind of things, if we have accuracy low, we cannot do it. Then when we pass the transition level, we have to request to set the QNH in the proper way. Okay, we have to is QNH 1012 cross check passing this specific altitude. Okay. Okay. Now we are going to talk about a little bit the approaches. What happened with the approaches? Before doing the approach, we have to be sure that my flight plan is perfect, is sequenced. We have to remove, because if we are following the flight plan, if we are on nav, automatically the aircraft is already sequenced. But what happens when we have some heading? When we have some heading, maybe we have some points behind, but we have to remove. We can remove with route, it's all. We have to do it direct to or radial in. Because if we don't sequence, if we don't properly sequence, when we have to do it a go around, nav is not going to be available. And the vertical profiles, also the JoJo, is not correct. Okay, so now we are, this is the thing, as we say, is the basic, is we are doing quickly to try to refresh all of these things that we already did in the type rating, because during the type rating is something that we are going to do it more deeply. Okay, then afterwards is when we have to request the pilot monitoring approach checklist. Why we have to approach checklist in this momentum? Because we already the QNH is already set. Because if you see the approach checklist, there is here barrow ref, and we have to set. We cannot read if we don't cross, if we have not already crossed the transition level. And remember, minimums is one of the important aspects of when we prepare the approach. Now we are going to talk only a little bit about approaches, the policy of the stabilization, the approach stabilize. When we say that my approach is stabilized, okay, when my aircraft is in a correct lateral and vertical flight path, and we don't need to do it big changes to maintain it in that position. When also at the same time, the desired landing configuration is already finished, and my speed is not more than 20 and not less than 5 knots below the BAPP. These things have to be done at 1,000 feet if we are on MC, or 500 on BMC. Okay? Now we are going to talk slightly about the approaches. The different types of approaches, how we are going to do it, these kind of approaches. First, decelerate. Always when we do it on a ILS, we can do it decelerate or early stabilize. But the proper way to do it, normally the company's policy, normally the pilots is doing the ILS or 3D approaches, not only the ILS, the 3D approaches, final APP or NAP on, we have to be, of course, 1,000 stabilized, but we have to do it decelerate. And what is decelerate? Why we say decelerate? Because we, in this time, either we say 3 nautical miles before engage the glide slope is when we are going to select flaps 1. And the rest of the configuration, we are going to let the aircraft decelerate during the descent. This is why the reason that we say decelerate approach. Because we are decelerate the approach during the time that we are descending. We have to be careful, very careful, that when we already arm the approach and we are descending or vertical descending or open descent, we have always the umbrella, we have the stop of the glide slope. The aircraft is not going to continue descending until the terrain because he's armed the glide slope. What happened with the early stabilized approaches? The early stabilized approaches are compulsory on the end to the approaches. Okay, what are these one? The viewer approaches, the viewer selected and managed selected, and also some AirNav approaches also the log flight path angle. This kind of approaching, we have to do it early stabilized. We have to configure the aircraft before reach the final descent point. This is the point that we have to descend. We have to descend on this one completely, fully configured, and also with the BAPP. When we insert the BAPP in this point, the deceleration point goes backwards. And we can configure the aircraft properly. There are some rules to do it. Maybe 9 nautical miles before this one, we select flaps 1, 7 flaps 2. That is more or less the way to configure this one to be sure that we have this one properly and this position. And remember that 0.3 nautical miles before this one is when we have to pull to descend on with the flight path vector. and with the flight path angle, okay, as the weight as is already on the chart, 2.8 degrees, 3 degrees, or something like that. Okay, so here is we see clear, okay, how is going to configure the aircraft before final descent point. Is how we are going to configure the aircraft. Did you see here activate approach phase? Later on we are going to talk about this one, activate approach phase, because I want that you remember and don't misunderstood and confuse with another things. Another thing that is good to remember, to refresh, is how to get the approach with the what we say glide slot from above. Already we know that this aircraft is going to engage the ILS, always when we have the glide slot above us. So the glide slot is coming from up to my position, and then when we engage, we have to start descending with the glide slot. But what happened if for any reason? If for any reason my glide slope is below, I have to engage the glide slope from above. If we already have the glide slope below and we already arm the approach, the aircraft is going to engage. It's going to engage the localizer. When imagine that we cross the glide slope, and we will see the glide slope is below here. When we arm the ILS, we engage the localizer, is normal, but the aircraft is not going to descend automatically to engage the glide slope. It's not going to do it. So we have to do it quickly, some actions. So when we already press the approach and my glide slope is below, we have to say an higher altitude above that we have, it doesn't matter which one, then we have to set vertical speed and pull, of course, 1,500 feet, but maximum 2,000. We have to put vertical speed 1,000, but it's important. We have to pull vertical speed. Be careful, not pull altitude. We have to set first, press the approach, then set at higher altitude on the FCDU, then set and pull the vertical speed 1,000. But this is the thing that we have to pull, the vertical speed, not the altitude. Because if we pull the altitude, because we have the altitude above, the aircraft is going to do it open climb and instead of descending. Okay? Then also, the same that before, we have to be sure that the glide slope is armed, because we are descending of vertical speed 1,000 or more, but we are descending at verticals, and we have to see how my glide slot is going to engage. And in this momentum is when we have to request set go around altitude. Set, not set and pull. Set go around altitude. Okay, do you remember that we about these things, approach, activate approach phase, that I said before that we are going to spend later on. Okay. There are so many misunderstood about this one. Before we already press, we are armed. We arm the approach. When we are armed approach, when we are clear for the approach, for ATC. But remember that this push button, we have to press only in two cases. When we are clear for the ILS, full ILS, or when we are going to do it our viewer full manage approach, of course, also with the air approaches. So, but this one, the push button of the FCU, that is arm approach, is not this one. This one is activate approach. You have to remember the aircraft is flying into phases: takeoff phase, climb phase, cruise phase, descent, and also the approach phase. The approach phase is something that is automatically activated when we pass the deceleration point. Automatically do it. But if for any reason we don't pass for this point, because we are already vectors, we have to activate automatically by on. When we activate this one, that is on the MCDU, in the progress page, in the performance page, okay, we have to activate here this one, okay, in the and automatically, if the speed is unmanaged, is going to reduce automatically the speed is to green dot. So before configure the aircraft, we have to activate the approach phase. So this my speed is going to reduce. So please don't confuse. Activate the approach phase with arm approach. There are two different, completely different things. About the bird, we are not going to, this one is something that we are going to, is doing more deeply in the type rating. Now we talk a little bit about callouts. We have to be sure that, remember that the callouts is something that we are going to be sure that the pilot monitoring understood exactly what we want. So there are callouts for everything. We are callouts for heading, callouts for speed, callouts for altitude, callouts to request the flaps to go around to some specific checklist. All of these things, okay, is there are callouts, and we have to follow this one. Not talking about also the configuration, the GS meaning, because this one, all of these things, this is the basic seminar, so we are not going to this one. When you do it, the type rating in GTA, we do it really deeply, but this one is, as I told you, is a refresh course. Now, something that is about the callouts and the aspect about the deviation. What happened with the deviation? Because on the deviation, we have to be sure that we have information, how we inform, how the pilot monitoring, how to inform the pilot flying that he is not following exactly what he has to do it. The pilot flying can be focusing on other things and can maybe is not going to follow properly everything. The pilot monitoring cannot say, because we have to do it in the proper way. We cannot say, oh, turn a little bit more to the right because the localizer is on that place, or your glide slope is below, so pitch a little bit more. Not. Of everything that is different of how to do it and on the proper position. If we have the speed is higher or lower, if the bank is more or less, if the pitch is big or less, or the localizer is not proper, or the glide is not in the proper position, or we have scene rate, we have to call and we have to advise the pilot in a proper way. How we have to say? In that case, that the speed is not proper, we don't say, hey, guy, your speed is below. No, you have to say speed. If you have pitch, bank, locked. Why? Because Because we have all of this information, we have where? In the primary flight display. We have everything on the primary flight display. In the primary flight display, okay, the pilot flying maybe is focused on one part of the primary flight display. We are already teach to do it, the scan of the primary flight display. We have to know how to do it the basic all time during the approach. But sometimes, because we are human, we can make errors, and we focus only on one thing and forgot the other ones. This is the reason when you say speed, what happened to the pilot flying? Goes immediately to the speed tape and see what happened and correct the actions. This is, we have to call and say speed, bank, not a little bit more speed, not a little bit more to the right, not look what happened with the localizer, not clear, speed, clear, lock, clear, glide. This is the way to call the pilot, to advise the pilot flying that are not flying properly. These things were in all the approaches also. Okay. Also, we have now what happened when we are on minimums. When we are doing the minimums, in this momentum here in this life as pilots, when we reach minimums, there is only two things that could happen. Only two things when we reach minimums. Only these two things, see or not see. If we don't see, go around. Go around. Go around flaps is the proper call out. What happened when we see? When we reach the minimum and we see, the pilot flying has to say continue. And if we are doing viewer approaches or AirNAV approaches, we cannot continue with the flight directors. And we cannot continue with the autopilot. So what we have to do it? We have to autopilot off. We have to request flight directors off. We have to request bird on and runway track. This is the way of doing when we reach minimum and we see. Now about the visual approaches, only a little bit things is that please we have to study the profile of the visual approaches. We have to start because it's very easy, the visual approach. Visual approach is, as we say, visual. So before entering in downwind, we have to prepare the aircraft. How to do it? We have to activate the approach phase. We have to manage speed. Okay, we have to maintain 1,000 with 1,000 feet above, and flight directors off and bird on. We have to do it the visual approach with the bird, because with the bird, remember that we are doing on track. So the wind, we are going to correct the wind because we fly tracks. Remember when we cross the threshold, and this one in this position, we have to maintain flaps 1, and my speed is going to be F. And also then afterwards, we have to abin, okay, we have to take time. That is, if 1,500 will be 45 seconds, and we have to take in account the wind. Remember that is 1 second less or more of this part of the downwind track. It depends if we have 1 second per one tail or headwind. But tail or headwind, the component of tail or headwind. Okay? This is about the visual. Okay. So what happened with how, and this one is the way to do it. This is the way to do it with the to properly to put it to, we'll see, to help how to do it the visual with this one or NAP and this one on 10. So we will start this information and we'll have information how is going to be separate from the one. Okay. Now we are going to talk a little bit about circling. Circling is one of the can say less maneuver that the pilot do it normally, and also there are some countries that is forbidden. Okay, normally this maneuver is not do it so frequency, so we have to know very clear. We have to know how to do it in advance, because the circling is the visual phase maneuver in the instrument approach. So there is going to bring the aircraft in the position of landing in a different runway of the straight approach. So we have to keep reference all time. What are the things that we have to remember? That we have to do it with the landing gear and config 3. What are the minimums that we have to introduce? The minimums of the circling that we are going to do it, and we have to be sure what side of the circling we can do it. This one we see here, circling is not authorized east of the runway, so we have to do it on the west of the runway. We have to be sure about this one, and we have to do it a very, very, very good briefing about the circling, because why? Because in the event that we have to do it and go around, remember that we have to do it the go around of the instrument approach that we have already cleared. And when we already activate the secondary flight plan, when we are doing the flap 3, we have to, when we reach the minimum, we have to keep the altitude pushed to level off. We have to take time 30 seconds when we have wind levels, and we have to keep the landing gear and flap 3 until we are on final. Okay, go around. So we already did this go around. We already did these approaches. And what happened? When we have to do it, the go around. Okay, before already say that when we reach the minimum, we don't see. But there are other circumstances that we have to do it also to go around. When the aircraft is not doing what we want. When we have some malfunction of one instrument. When the ATC is telling me to do it. When we have wind shear. And when we don't know where we are. This is the situational awareness. Please, if you don't know where are you, please go around. You have to be always go around minded. Please go around minded. And these things could happen immediately. This is the reason. Remember that I told you in the briefing that you have to do it when you prepare the approach. You have to do it a good briefing and be focused on the go around, because when you have to do it a go around, you cannot do that momentum. Oh, we have to turn left, to turn right. Where not? You have to be sure that both pilots know what to do it on during the go around. And of course, go around flaps. And it's one step. It's one step of flaps. Okay? When we do it the go around, and remember that the go around, we have to do it the go around, we have to put the thrust on toga. This is compulsory. Don't let people do it a go around without passing the toga, the thrust by toga. Because if not, All of these things is not going to happen. It's not going to engage the flight direction. It's not going to tell you to put on 15 degrees up. The misapproach is going to be active plan, but only if we do this one. This is the things. But in the case that you don't have, please, in the event that you don't have flight directors, your nose must be on 15 if you have both engines. The normal go around is like this, go around flaps. TOGA, we have to set one step of the flights of the flaps. When we have positive climb, you are up, and you have to read the FM8. What happened with the high energy? High energy is when you are below, when you are not reached the minimums, when you are a higher altitude but below the go-around altitude. Imagine that you are the go-around altitude is 3,000 feet, and you are at 2,500 in that momentum. You do it a go-around because it's requested by the ATC. Always you have to. The thrust must be past TOGA, and then immediately maybe you have to put it on climb. But it's compulsory to pass for TOGA, so the aircraft knows to activate the go around maneuver, put your nose at 15 degrees, and all of these things. There is another way to. What happens when you don't want to continue with the approach? We name of this one, we say discontinue approach. But when we can do it discontinue approach, when my altitude is above the go-around altitude, or the same of the go-around altitude, we can say cancel the approach. And in this one, it's very easy. We only have to press the approach push button, and it's going to disconnect the arm, the ILS, or the approach that we already activate. So when we do it, when we already done the go around, what we have to think what we are going to do it. We can do it another approach, the same approach, another approach to the same airport, or go to the alternate. If you are going to return, it's very easy because the machine is already loaded, and the only thing that you have to do it first, read before after takeoff climb checklist, and afterwards you have to activate the approach. And you are able to do it immediately again, the approach again, because it's already loaded. After the go-around maneuver that is already active in this moment, also the previous approach is already loaded. Okay. About the landing is something that we do it normally on the type rating, because I don't want to extend so much, and we are going to talk some different aspects of the flight management, and other things that are a little bit more for this course. Remember that we have to very big computer, FMNGC, and we try to do it everything on manage. There is one help. There is a marvelous tool that we have. The manage. We are the workload is much more less if we do the things on manage. Also, climb manage speed, and everything manage descents, because there's constraints. Everything is taken account all time. Remember this one on we have to don't try to fly above or below the optimum. Always try to do this one, because we have maybe sure that we are going to burn much more fuel, and never fly never fly in an altitude above the recommendation maximum altitude. Okay, how to disconnect and connect the autopilot is only to refresh a little bit. Remember that it's something that we have to do it on the FCU. Please, when we try to connect this one, to connect the autopilot, we have to be sure that the flight directors are on. Flight directors are on. And my actual speed is about BLS. Because if my speed is below BLS, we spend hundreds of times trying to press the autopilot and it's not going to engage. And of course, if the aircraft is properly trimmed. When is happening this one? When we have an engine failure. When we have an engine failure, we have to properly trim the aircraft so we can engage. This is for engage. Disengage, please, this button. This is the marvelous button. The marvelous button to disengage. Never disengage pressing on the FCU. Okay? What happened with the autothrust? The autothrust is easy. Okay? So why? Because if we are with manual thrust. First, of course, the thing is we have to press the autothrust. Okay, the autothrust is going to be green, and then we have to move the thrust to climb, and automatically the autothrust is already engaged. How to disconnect the autothrust? Always we have to remember this one. Remember that these one are here on the engine. There are information very important. This dot, this donut, is position of the lever, and the green line, this green line is the actual thrust that we have. So we have to move. The dot until this position, and in that momentum is when we have to press that button. Never disconnect here. Do it with this one. Is how to disconnect the autothrust. Okay, the call-outs, we already talked about the call-outs. Remember that it's essential to be sure that the pilot monitoring knows what we are going to do. Remember that it's in pro-norm SOPs, okay? And we have to be sure to identify the difference of set. Set only means to move one thing, to set one specific altitude, to set one specific heading, to set one specific speed, but don't change. Only with this one, you don't change the mode. You don't change it. When we see this one very clear, when we engage the glide lock and we say set go around altitude. We move the altitude and we set, but we don't change the mode. Another thing is pull or push if we want to change the mode. And remember about the FM8. The pilot monitoring should call out any FMA change. Any FMA change. Remember that normally on the FMA, because you have to know that your FMA. And the FMA, the changes appears in a box, white box for 10 seconds. Okay, this is about the callouts. And there are just few slides. Now we are going to one of the key elements that on the flight crew techniques manual you can see is the golden rules. Golden rules. There are 4 golden rules. First, everybody knows, fly, navigate, and communicate. The second one is use the appropriate level of automation in all times. Third one is understand the FMA at all times. And the fourth one, please take actions if the things is not going as you expected. If the aircraft is not going. We are going to deeply in this one. What is flight? The first golden rule, flight, because we say flight. Well, what is the meaning of flight? Okay, that the aircraft is in a safe path. So we have in a proper weight. My speed is correct. My pitch is proper from this position. So we are going in a safety and weight of flight. Means that we are with the normal bank. We are normal with the normal pitch. This is flight. And also the position of the flaps of the landing gear. So it's bring the aircraft into a safe flight parameters. Safety flight path. Safety flight path. It's the first thing that you have to do. Happen what everything happen. First, please fly the aircraft. The second one, navigate. Please know where you are when you take off. And for any reason you have an engine failure and you are follow the SID, and this SID is going to go into the mountains, and maybe you are not going to be able to clear the mountains. You are not navigating. You know where, you don't know where are you. You don't know where you are. So navigate. Know where you have to go. And the third one is communicate. Communicate is not communicate. People think that communicate on the first golden rule is to talk with the ATC. Not. Is to communicate also with the pilot monitoring. It's also to communicate with the cabin crew. It's also, of course, to communicate with the ATC. And the second one, use the automation, okay, and whatever you need. So try to let the aircraft do it by his own. Try to use automation. Don't try to fight with the aircraft. This one is the second one. So if any help, use the automatic mode. This one, he will help you and will reduce so much your workload. If the auto thrust is possible, do it. Let's do it. The third one is understand what is the FMA. Understand what is the FMA. This one is one of the most important things in the type rating. Is one of the most important things when you fly Airbus. This one. This upper side of the PFD is one of the most important things. You have to know your FMA. The pilot line has to monitor what happened on the FMA. Has to announce the pilot monitoring what changes on the FMA. What confirmed the FMA. And the most important thing, understood the FMA. Because remember that this aircraft is going to fly what the FMA say, not what you already do on the MCDU or on the FCU. It has to be here. If it is not here, the aircraft is not going to do it. And of course, if you have some problem, take over. So this is so if the aircraft at the end is not going to do it, is not doing what is not going to do it what you really want or what you expect, please take the control. This is the most important, the fourth one. Okay, now we are going to talk a little bit about the abnormals and the Airbus philosophy, only to remind some important aspect, because it's something that we have to all time to keep in your mind. Remember that this aircraft, as I just say to everybody, this aircraft, as I say, is so much computers, so much detectors, 2 wings and 2 engines. This is Airbus. So we have so many information that is going to give to the computers, and these computers is going to give to me, is going to give to the pilots, is going to appear on the ECAM. On the ECAM, if there is something, if there is some malfunction, is going to tell you. These are the things that it will solve. So if all of these things appears, we have to take, we have to say, we have to request the pilot monitoring to act about the actions that my ECAM tell me. But what happened with these sensors? Don't give information to the computers, and the computers don't say anything to the ECAM. When we don't have ECAM at all, when we don't have any, we have some malfunctions, but there is nothing on the ECAM. The pilot flying has to request, please use the QRH. This is the reason that the QRH is so important. This is the reason that the QRH, we have to know what are inside the QRH. Because Airbus say, you have to know your QRH. You have to, the Airbus don't say you have to learn the QRH by memory. You have to know what is inside the QRH. What are the malfunctions that are inside? Because there are some malfunctions that will not appear on the ECAM. Because we think, no, everything is going to advise. No, sometimes not. Sometimes not. In that case, use the QRH. So the first is ECAM. Second, QRH. And what happened with when the QRH, there is nothing also about that issue? Go to the FCON. And in the FCON, not to read all the abnormals, not. Go to supplementary, because maybe on the supplementary are the key of the problem. So remember that we already talked about this one, the sequence of the procedure. So when we have some malfunctions, we have to first at all, we have to do it immediate action if there is one memory item or OIB. So the first thing, when we have some in the abnormal or emergency situation, okay, so we have to apply the procedure. First, the immediate action. Second, OIBs. Then ECAM, and third, the QRH. But always, 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 we have to check the overhead panel to confirm the fault or the faulty of the system. Okay? Remember that there are 3 levels of message. Level 3, that is master warning. Okay, that is the most important one, with the red one, master caution with the amber one, and with the single chime, and master caution with no chime. Also remember, we have to remember what the different LANASAP and LANASAP amber. This one we need an immediate action. This one we have to prepare and consider the nearest suitable. This one is the safe, enough to safe landing, and this one when we are landing with suitable airport. So how we have to do it, the task sharing? When we have one ECAM, the pilot monitoring is by request by the pilot flying, is the responsible of read the ECAM, okay, and act, as the ECAM say, read the QNH or read the checklist, cross-check, and operate the decide buttons, and also clear the actions. Remember that the pilot monitoring never touch the thrust. The thrust controls are of the pilot flying. And this is the buttons that is request to do it cross-check. Okay, this is the cross-checks. We have to request confirm. We have to request confirm, okay, for this one, for engine master, or for something that is underneath the words. This one is how to do it. We have to see the systems, and then later on we have to see what is the button that we have to add. This is the way to do it. So first, this is the reason that normally on the ECAM appears the name of the system, and say later on the selector that we are going, and the third, the action that we have to do it. First, go to the system. Second, the selector that is already on the ECAM. And third, the action that we have to do it, push on or off. Like this, master caution, engine fail. The first, any OEB that affected. If not, ECAM action. So with this ECAM action, when the pilot flying say ECAM action, inside is the pilot flying is assumes the communication. He already have the control, but with this one, with this phrase ECAM action, already assumes all control the aircraft. So let the pilot monitoring act on the ECAM. Later on, the pilot monitoring, when already do all the action, we have to say clear engine to fail, the failure that already happened. He say clear, and we have to clear all of these things. And later on, when we reach the status, when we reach return, we have to remember, when we reach the status, we have to remember that the pilot flying has to request different things. Okay, we have to say stop ECAM, and he has to request any checklist, any system reset, or any additional procedure like engine restart. If not, continue ECAM. Remember, any checklist, we have to do checklist, normal checklist, paper checklist, before continuing with the status. Don't forget this one. And later on, when we already finish the status, the pilot monitoring request remove status, the pilot flying confirm remove, and it's the momentum that the pilot monitoring say ECAM action complete. And this is